Welcome everybody and to the final Agrarian Change Seminar of this autumn 2023. My name is Elena Perez Niño. I'm one of the editors, the current editors of the Journal of Agrarian Change, and I am also an assistant professor here at the ISS. The Journal of Agrarian Change has been organizing these annual seminars since 2008, and since the pandemic, this has been organized as online hybrid mode, roughly for a couple of years now. And so because this has been quite successful, we've continued with this mode this year as well. Today's seminar is co-organized by the Journal of Agrarian Change and the ISS. And it is a pleasure because it is also the first seminar that we host here in the Netherlands. And we are joined by some emeriti editors and past collaborators of the journal. So it's a reason for great rejoicement. I am joined today by some other co-organizers, Amod Shah from the ISS, digitally and online, Carlos Muyanga from SOAS, Enrique Castañón from the University of College London, and Shreya Sinya from Queen Mary in the University of London. And before we move to introduce our guests today, I would also like to flag up that this meeting will be recorded. So if you do not want to, your audio or your video to be recorded, please keep your camera off and use the chat for comments and questions. Now over to today's seminar. It is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Irna Hofman, who is a rural sociologist focusing on agrarian political economy and social change in Central Asia. She carried out long-term research in rural Tajikistan for her dissertation in Leiden, and also completed a postdoctoral project in the University of Oxford. Her research interests are very broad and sit at the intersection of political economy, political geography, political ecology, and cover a broad range of themes, including agrarian and social change, labor, conflict, gender, and global China. Indeed, China's role in rural Central Asia is the topic of today's presentation, which is entitled From Seeds of Friendship to Technologies of Resistance, Understanding China's Ambiguous Role in Rural Tajikistan. So we will have roughly 45 to 50 minutes in the presentation, and then we will all move on to the Q&A session, both with participants in the room and those of you who want to participate online. So without further ado, I'll give the floor to you, Irma.
Thank you very much. So get share the screen. And we get started. Yes. Well, thank you very much for having me. It's really a great honor to be invited, and thank you. I'm really grateful that you're all attending here and as well as online, and I'm very happy that I can present you some work in progress as well as some past research, and I also touch on some ideas or dynamics that I would like to focus on in future research. If you visit any small shop in rural Tajikistan with agricultural input supplies, you may be overwhelmed with the variety of seeds and agrochemicals on the shelves, and those range from German branded watermelon seeds to 25 kg maize from China. And within that diversity, actually, those from China, so fertilizers, herbicides, pesticides, and seeds, coming from China have increased in recent years. And in this presentation, in this talk, I will focus on this dynamic. I'm looking at China's growing role in agri-food markets with a focus on Tajikistan, so examining this dynamic from the ground up. So I may disappoint you a bit that in this talk, I won't really focus on the technologies of resistance because of time constraints. But if there's time in the Q&A, I'm very happy to talk further on that. I also don't know how many of you are actually familiar with Tajikistan, Central Asia, and I don't have a lot of time to tell you more about that. But if there are any questions during the presentation, then please raise hands. So the questions I'm asking in this talk, how does China's growing role in agri-food markets manifest itself, that is on the ground? Are Chinese actors reordering the global agri-food regime? And if so, how? With what result? Is China's capital actually qualitatively different? So I examined these questions through the lens of a case study, namely a company engaged in seed breeding in Tajikistan. This company started operating in 2012, so before the widely mentioned Belt and Road Initiative, and it was actually initiated in 2011. And I'll come to introduce the company and analyze its development shortly later on. Notably, this company was, and actually still is, the only foreign company engaged in seed breeding in Tajikistan on the ground. So there's a lot of seeds and other agricultural inputs imported to Tajikistan, but those are imported by traders or international organizations, the Tajik state. There are no foreign companies or the big food barons active in Tajikistan on the ground. And interestingly, this company was also the only foreign company engaged in Tajikistan's second seed sector development program that ran from 2016 to 2020. All the other foreign actors involved in that program were international organizations and donors like GIZ and the World Bank, for instance. So I use this case to examine China's growing role globally in agriculture, and I look at the dynamics and the modalities of the diffusion of seeds. And I should mention here is that this company is not the only Chinese company engaged in Tajikistan. There is one very big agribusiness, a state-owned enterprise engaged in primary production of cotton, but I focus here on the seed sector in particular. China's growing role in global agriculture has received increasing attention in recent years. Most of the research and the literature today still focuses on the macro level. There's not much literature that focuses on dynamics on the ground. And the research that exists, mostly focused on Southeast Asia, for instance, African countries. There's not much that focuses on Central Asia. So I focus here on Chinese cotton seeds, and this actually offers a very perfect lens to examine dynamics. Notably, and I'll mention this later on as well, cotton in Tajikistan is known as the state's wealth, Boygarida Vlad. It is the primary agricultural export crop, and revenue streams, or actually the entire cotton economy in Tajikistan, is in hands of the ruling regime. So a big question is, how do Chinese cotton seeds travel in this politicized landscape? And this question is particularly relevant given China's growing influence in Tajikistan. In the last decade, the Tajik state has become increasingly reliant on China, as mentioned here. In 2015, loans represented 53% of total external debt, so loans from China. And at present, this year, almost 31% of Tajikistan's external debt is owed to China. Apart from that, actually, the Chinese state has financed and is currently undertaking the construction of Tajikistan's new parliamentary buildings. So that actually testifies to the big role China has in the country. So what does this mean for companies aiming to access the cotton market? That's what we'll look at in the following. So before I really go down to the ground, some takeaways. First, the farm field is a political domain. The way in which land is used, the inputs that farmers have at their disposal, and what they do with the produce. These dynamics result from the interaction of a plethora of actors, and they are not all actually located in the vicinity of the physical site of production, right? Some are really far away from the actual farm field. Second, the case analyzed here addresses that the Chinese state plays a very important role in driving capital over the border. But what happens after depends on various factors and actors. And it is Chinese individuals, as I will show later, together with actors in the host or the recipient country, you could say here, Tajikistan, who actualize policy plans and often to their own interest. And, well, I would also like to address that, well, there's a lot of focus on the Belt and Road Initiative today, but a lot of the developments we see in China's globalization have been happening as in a continuum. So a lot of processes and developments have been set in motion before. So the Belt and Road Initiative is a policy program that actually follows earlier policy plans. And lastly, in analysis of global China, we should acknowledge the processes already underway on the ground, such as the capitalist process of capitalist transformation, to quote Luna. So briefly on the background and the methodology. Most of the work I present here is based on fieldwork I undertook in Tajikistan as part of my postdoctoral research project at the University of Oxford within a big ERC-funded project, China, Law and Development, that actually ends this year. I undertook fieldwork in 2020-2021. It was a period of 20 months during the pandemic, and I'm not going to delve into that, but if there are any questions, I'd be happy to answer. It was not easy. I can say it was a challenge and it required quite some flexibility and adaptation. But in that period, I undertook mostly qualitative research where possible, of course. I stayed in different parts of Southwest Tajikistan during those months for ethnographic research, and I undertook a lot of semi-structured interviews with a large variety of actors, mostly Tajik, such as agricultural scientists, farmers, state officials, at various levels of the state administration. I also visited a Chinese company bases on a regular basis during the agricultural season. And I interacted with people within the donor community as well. And I also undertook archival research in 2021 with a focus on agricultural developments during the Soviet Union. And this was very important to historically contextualize the developments, but also to have informed discussions with people in Tajikistan, such as the agricultural scientists and the farmers. I also analyzed media, and as will be shown, or I'll show later on, that I also make use of some state documents. Part of my research in that period and the findings I present here are also based on my research I undertook for my dissertation. I've completed my PhD at the University of Leiden with a focus on agrarian political economy in Tajikistan, for which I did fieldwork in 2012, 13, and 14, 15, every year different periods. So actually I realized also in 2020, 21 that earlier period was very important in terms of rapport building and in terms of understanding the context. So in the remainder of the talk, I will take you over place and over time. So looking at China's globalization or engagement in global agriculture, going down to Tajikistan's rural areas, and over time. So looking at the way in which Chinese actors actually have become more assertive in global agriculture, China's growing role in rural Central Asia, and also looking at developments in Tajikistan's seed sector, so from the 1990s until 2020, basically. So over place from the macro to the micro. Chinese companies more actively started going out in the 2000s, the early 2000s, with the Chinese state's go out policy plan. So that was in order to access new markets, but there was also an overproduction and excess supply. So that was when the first companies started to engage in foreign agricultural markets. In the late 2000s, and I think many of you are familiar with the whole time, the global land grab, that was the period in which Chinese companies also started to invest in farmland. And actually Chinese actors were assumed major actors in this global land grab. And later on, their role actually was more nuanced. But this was a period in which they started to invest in farmlands, SOEs and private enterprises as well, for various reasons. In later years, so basically from the mid-2000s until today, we see the Chinese companies and various Chinese actors, so diverse actors start to engage in foreign agricultural markets in different ways. They're acquiring agribusinesses, those are small and big. So we see that there are new mechanisms of control and new mechanisms of engagement. And you may have heard about the acquisition of Syngenta in 2017, with which actually Sinochem or ChemChina actually was able to access way more markets. But also at smaller scale, we see these developments, such as in Tajikistan. And these developments have been met with quite some controversy and contestation in recent years, basically among three groups of actors. Firstly, governments from the global north, which fear the weaponization of agricultural IP and, threats to national security. Second, existing agri-powers, such as Bayer and Dow, who see actually Chinese companies as new competitors in agri-food markets, as well as seed and food sovereignty activists and social movements, for whom China is actually adding, or China's growing role is actually adding to the concerns they already have. So there's a question, how do farmers position themselves in this debate? And of course, farmers, this is not a homogeneous group, so there's an enormous variety, right, in terms of what they grow, their scale, and their engagement with markets. And second, the question is, what I already mentioned before, are Chinese actors actually so much different compared to those already active in global agri-food markets? And as some question actually, is China sowing the seeds of empire? So continuing now with Central Asia, Chinese presence in Central Asia actually, emerged or increased relatively late, much later than in Southeast Asia, for instance, and in Africa, even though the region actually borders China. So the first large-scale investments took place in the mid-2000s, and from that year onwards, or from that period onwards, we see a growing number in terms of loans and investments, and in terms of actors, as well as the diversity. So in terms of the sectors Chinese actors engage in, and the kinds of actors active on the ground. And as a result, the interaction with the populations is also diversifying, actually. For instance, I can give you an example. In the earlier years, most of the big Chinese companies always brought in their own translators, and those translated from Chinese, often to Russian, because that's the second language in most of the countries in the region. Nowadays, you see that most of the Chinese companies, they find translators from the countries, and these people often then take way more roles than only translating. So they become, for instance, intermediary, broker, or manager, and in that way, take on a much more important role than only translating. So that is how the developments basically took place. And of course, since the Belt and Road Initiative, investments and Chinese presence has really increased in the region. In 2011, the Gu brothers moved to Central Asia, and this is a pseudonym. These were two brothers who had made their career in China's domestic seed sector. One of them was a seed specialist with whom I interacted. His brother was a former state official. In 2011, they presented their plans to the Ministry of Agriculture in Tajikistan, as Mr. Gu himself told me. Well, in 2011, entrusted by the Ministry of Agriculture of China and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, we carried out a cooperation agreement signed between the Ministry of Agriculture of China and the Ministry of Agriculture in Tajikistan. And they registered their company. The certificate is here on the left. And their project materialized in a joint venture of Chinese companies, two Chinese companies, a state-owned enterprise and a private enterprise, both from Henan province, where the brothers came from. And in the remainder of the talk, I primarily only focus on the state-owned enterprise. Briefly, the private enterprise was focused on vegetables production in greenhouses to be sold on local markets in winter when prices were high. But the state-owned enterprise had a completely different focus. It focused on primary production, initially of cotton, rice, wheat, and maize. And it also, soon after the start, upon arrival, it started with seed testing, seed production, seed processing, and seed sales. And there was a lot unknown at the start. People were talking about land grab, about produce being exported to China. So there was a lot of speculation, actually. But what did they do, actually, the Gu brothers? So they focused after some time, actually from the third year onwards, so third year, on cotton, wheat, and maize seeds. Why? These are the primary crops in lowland Tajikistan, grown by many commercial farmers. And as I already mentioned, cotton is known in Tajikistan as the state's wealth. It is the primary agricultural export commodity, contributing 10% around cumulatively to export earnings. It's sown on currently around 22% of arable land, and sowing rates are high, and I'll come to that later on as well. The company also focused on wheat and maize seeds, and those dynamics were much less controversial. So I'll focus here on cotton in particular. And it is important, by focusing on these three crops, actually the Gu brothers spoke to the interests of the Chinese as well as the Tajik states. And it is also important to mention that cotton and wheat in Tajikistan planted is primarily open pollinated, in contrast to various other crops being sown or seeds being sown in Tajikistan, and also, for instance, maize. Most of the maize seed nowadays imported is hybrid maize from China as well. So in order to understand the developments that took place, it is important to go back a bit to understand the context a bit. So looking at Tajikistan's seed system, and particularly looking at the cotton sector. I don't know how many of you are familiar. Tajikistan was the third cotton producing country in the Soviet Union. Actually, the cotton economy was built in the 1930s or 1920s, it started. So in those years, the state invested considerably in research and development well, basically everything around cotton production. Initially, we're talking about seeds, foreign seeds were imported, but over time, actually from around the late 1940s, don't pin me down on the exact year, but domestic varieties were bred and became planted on the large-scale state and collective farms in those years. So there was the state had a strong role in research and development and coordinate. Everything was state planned. And this came to a halt in the 1990s with the breakdown of the Soviet Union and Tajikistan's civil war, which really had a great impact on the rural economy. International donors quickly moved in those years. I mean, to support the country, basically to move to a market-based economy, but also to provide aid in the aftermath of the war. And one of those conditions to aid was that the state would step back, so would divest from agriculture. And of course, it didn't have much reserves to do so. But what the state did was that it transformed the state plant economy into a private plant economy. So it allowed elites to set up a few very big companies who held the prerogative to supply the big cotton producing farms. They had territorial control. At the same time, the state banned the import of foreign cotton seeds. So that meant that cotton producing farmers could only get their seeds from these few big farms. So that really, strengthened the whole, basically leveraged the power of those big companies, futures companies they were called. And in that way, actually, the state satisfies or met the demands of donors. At the same time, because I mean, it liberalized on paper, it liberalized the cotton sector, but it also served to get funds from abroad, because these few companies were financed by big cotton companies abroad. This system came to a halt after from 2008 onwards. Actually, it was a coinciding crisis which leveraged the pressure or the role of international donors who could really demand an end to this so-called futures system. So the futures system was dismantled. From that year onwards, farmers would be completely free to grow whatever they wanted. And the seed import ban was also lifted. And what we see over the course of the years actually is that quality has made, if we talk about cotton, quality has made way to quantity. So farmers are sold based on the weight of the seed cotton they supply. So that is their primary, well, basically their priority. Also, as a result of basically the disappearing the coordination of the state or these futures companies, we see that there is more heterogeneity in terms of seeds. Most farmers actually nowadays purchase their seed from ginneries, cotton gins, and I'll come to that later on as well, which are actually coming from previous harvests. And very often it's a big complaint among farmers that they cannot find clean seeds any longer. And that's a result actually of the loss, whether, I mean, not in a positive way, but it is actually a result of the change in the system. Still, over the course of the time until today, it's mainly what I already mentioned. It's open pollinated varieties which are planted. And until today, there is still little foreign engagement in the sector. Apart from some international organizations, there are no big seed companies actually engaged in cotton in Tajikistan. So there is a wide range of actors engaged, so that's in the sector, but quality seed is a big problem if you talk with farmers nowadays. So there's the Ministry of Agriculture and various state agencies, traders, foreign donors, well, cotton gins. And they interact with each other in very complex ways. Some have overlapping roles. There are also over 50 seed breeding farms, which actually are mandated to reproduce seeds. But farmers widely complain that getting quality, well, clean cotton seeds, is a problem. Briefly, before we continue with back to the Chinese company, so farmers today can get their cotton seeds from basically they can get it from three places or three outlets. The first is the cotton gin, which is the most affordable seed because it's derived from previous harvests. It's often locally, it's nearby where farmers actually have their fields. So that's where most farmers go, even though there's a big risk that, well, quality is low. Second, farmers can get their seed from traders or gins or capitalized farmers who import seed, but those seeds are often very, very expensive. So only few farmers are able to do so. And lastly, there are seed breeding farms. Over 50 seed breeding farms in Tajikistan are engaged in, or actually are mandated to reproduce cotton seed, but it's a general complaint that they are not really active and actually use their land for other purposes. So these farms are officially private, but they still have a special status and are mandated by the Ministry of Agriculture to engage in seed production. And as one farmer has complained and shared his concerns, he said, well, cotton seeds are not clean any longer. They are busy, but they are ugly. The yields are low, around 2 tons a hectare. Before, yields were high, around 4 tons a hectare. Importantly, farmers in Tajikistan are still forced to produce cotton. They have to plant cotton on 60 to 70% of their farmland, but they are left to their own device when it comes to securing quality input. So that's one of the reasons why sowing rates are relatively high, because if there's a risk that seeds don't germinate, they sow higher volumes. And this happens in a context in which the state owns the land in Tajikistan. So there's actually an informal pressure, but by growing cotton, you convey loyalty. And not growing cotton, I mean, can have implications for your land use rights. So as I already mentioned, in 2011, the Gu brothers presented their plans and their project took off in 2012. And from the start, actually, they enjoyed support from the Tajik state. They had good ties with the governor in the southwestern region, and they were able to recruit various specialists to basically help their company developing, to expedite bureaucratic procedures and to access land, to access particular actors. And also, for instance, they were able to rent office space in Tajikistan's ministry, in the building of the Ministry of Agriculture, which I visited and was surprised to see that as well. Actually, and that helped really to market the seeds and access specific actors. And they also purchased time on national television to advertise for their seeds. And over the course of the years, actually, there was a growing reliance on these Tajik actors. And apart from that, the company was financed by the Chinese state. So for instance, in 2014, they started to distribute seed planters, 52 to various localities in the region. So basically, that combination helped them to develop their projects. According to some of the company employees, Tajik company employees, they were also tasked with developing some proposals for to be submitted to the Chinese state. And actually, from the first years onwards, seed testing also took off. So, as Mr. Gu told me, well, we carried out hybrid cottonseed production in Tajikistan in 2013 and 14. We started pollinating at 5 o'clock in the morning, and the personnel fixed the cotton plants and marked them with red threads. We taught a group of people how to pollinate. You know, the old cotton varieties in Tajikistan have a ripening period of 135 to 140 days, and the fiber content is only 36%. The new varieties I planted have a ripening period of 125 to 130 days, and the fiber content is higher, 42 to 43%. So the hybrid cotton we planted had 150 bulls per plant and a bull weight of 5.5 grams. So with these varieties, the Gu brothers actually spoke to the interests of 3 groups of actors in Tajikistan: farmers, because the yield would be high and the ripening period would be short. Today, many farmers face late rains, which can cause seeds to wash out, and early rains in autumn or early snow even can really impact the harvest later on. So that was one. Second, with a high fiber content, well, they met the interest of traders and cotton gins, and all over, of course, this was in the interest of the Tajik state. And actually, it paid off over the course of the years. From 2014 onwards, you see it with the red dots. Various Chinese cottonseed varieties entered Tajikistan state registry of protected varieties approved for sales. So the first one was in 2014 and then 15, and some followed in 17, 18, actually until today. But things didn't always really run smoothly. And actually, in the first years, the company started working with contract farming schemes with farmers, and those contracts were brokered by state officials. So farmers were supplied with seeds and fertilizers and would purchase the cotton at the end of the season. But it only ran for 2 years as it appeared unsuccessful. And company staff told me, actually, they first blamed farmers, stating that farmers had been selling inputs to other farmers, but later on admitted that the seeds they had provided were not well, basically compatible with the local conditions, as they had provided, for instance, delinted cotton seeds. In Tajikistan, most farmers plant linted cotton seeds, so farmers didn't have the required seed planters to use those. What is more, in 2015, one farmer also went to court stating that the seed certificates of the seed he had been sowing had been faked. He lost the case in the end because he had only asked a committee to pass by to see his fields after the cotton harvest. So the fields were already completely empty. But the court case had been very lengthy, and interestingly, it had been a Tajik company employee who had been representing the company in court. So there had not been any Chinese staff member engaged. But the case had no political implications. And there were also other issues, as one farmer shared with me. He had been encouraged to buy the seeds after seeing the advertisement on television, and he needed a fast ripening one, but it didn't work out. So he had been arguing with the agent, as I quote him here. I called to the agent and told him that this variety was not a fast ripening one. It did not ripen after 90 days. It is a lie. We argued, this is not a fast ripening variety. It is not. But in the end, this also had no real implications. And actually, the Gu brothers received quite some support in later years. I already showed you some of the seeds that were registered, and actually Mr. Gu proudly showed or he shared some of these certificates with me very recently. And interestingly, what you see here with the orange orange frame, in 2017, Mr. Gu introduced a variety which was renamed by Tajikistan's president, Emomali Rahmon, as Friendship Number 1, Dusti Yak. So that is quite a symbolic name. And actually, until today, this variety is planted in Tajikistan, and among farmers, it is known as a Tajik variety, and it's become quite popular. But what happened then? Actually, so there were some technical issues, there was some contestation, but what really was an issue in the end was that the Gu brothers wanted to introduce hybrids in Tajikistan to really profit from their seed sales. But this was not welcomed, actually, by the Tajik state officials, as one told me. In China, all kinds of hybrid exist, but open pollinated ones are better. Hybrids have to be purchased every year. Every year, our farmers are not able to do so. For that purpose, we've said, bring OPs. We test the varieties officially. If they meet the demands, we regionally approve them, and the varieties can spread among farmers. Then they can use the varieties for several years. And well, Mr. Gu was not happy with this, as he said, well, in Central Asia, the production and promotion of seeds will not bring much profit if there are no hybrid varieties. Because the demand in Tajikistan is too small, large-scale production and sales are a problem. If we send a few technicians, it will be very expensive. So we stopped. However, our work was very successful, and the quality of the hybrids produced was very good. Mr. Gu left to Kazakhstan, where he now looks for new markets and new projects. His brother, the former state official, according to hearsay, fled Tajikistan and left the state-owned company in debt as land and labor taxes have not been paid. And according to some Chinese interlocutors, he's even been sued as he embezzled state funds. But this is something I can't confirm. But anyway, the two brothers left, and the state-owned company continues, but continues with open pollinated varieties nowadays. So there's a big question, actually, how popular these seeds now are, and it is very, very difficult to quantify them. I mean, if you look at these import figures, they don't show a clear picture. I know that some of the imported volumes are not included here, but, and of course, if we talk about open pollinated varieties, those are not imported on a regular basis. So it doesn't say much. What it does say is that actually over the course of the years, we see a growing import in terms of value, and this is in weight, but also you see a growing, it's very small, I hope you can read it a bit, but also in terms of the diversity of exporters to Tajikistan, the diversity has also increased. What I must say here is that Tajikistan is, apart from importing seed for sowing, is also importing cotton seed for other purposes. Actually, cotton oil is the most popular oil in Tajikistan, and for that purpose, it imports enormous volumes of seed from, for instance, Kazakhstan. But if we look at some other sources or data, I undertook a very, very small survey among farmers who located in the vicinity of the company. And among the questions I asked was the kind of seeds they were sowing. One problem is that not all farmers know the name of the seed, the name of the variety there. So some say I grow Dusti here, for instance, well, it's written in Cyrillic, but that's why I grow Dusti. Another says I grow Chinese, or I grow American or Turkey. So that makes it sometimes very hard to know the origin of the seeds. But you see here that, well, they say that the Dusti, the friendship number 1, is actually nowadays a Tajik variety. And interestingly, even though it's officially a hybrid variety, farmers continue to sow it. So it's been sown for various years, and only what I heard is after the 3rd or the 4th year, they encountered declining yields. So in this survey, around 20% of the farmers I interviewed nowadays plant Chinese seeds. So I'd say from, well, pre-2012 to today, well, that suggests at least a growth, because most of the other varieties have been introduced in previous years. Those are Turkish or Tajik varieties. What is more, if we look at the state registry, and these are some other pages than the ones I showed before, there are actually almost 20% of the varieties nowadays officially registered in Tajikistan are Chinese. And the first one was registered in 2014. And well, this is data from until this year. There actually have been 14 registered in recent years, so over the course of 9 years. So that suggests a growth of the Chinese. And interesting, what you see here that this is also Cyrillic, but so there were 3 hybrid varieties that were introduced in 2017, but later on all varieties registered were again open pollinated ones. So this brings me actually to conclude that China's globalization is not linear, and it's contingent on various factors and actors from outside as well as on the ground, who shaped the unfolding of policy plans and projects. So to conclude, changes in land use exemplify the political nature of farming, and they reflect in part, or they can reflect, macro level dynamics. I didn't really come to the anti-China sentiment issue, but we can discuss it later on. But this is not really pronounced among cotton growing farmers in Tajikistan who wish clean seeds, which the Chinese company could provide. Third, the Belt and Road Initiative is a policy plan that follows the earlier go global policy plans, and China's globalization is not linear. Second, the Chinese state drives capital over the border, but individuals, as we saw with the Gu brothers, they actualize those plans, and they, well, we could say they shape the materialization of capital, including, well, also the factors and actors on the ground are involved. So is China reordering the global agri-food regime? Is it sowing the seeds of empire? Well, the Gu brothers aim to gain control over Tajikistan's cotton seed sector, seed market, and they failed, or at least it disappointed, and that's why they left. So, well, they saw Tajikistan as a seed frontier, or a frontier of accumulation. Lastly, in analyzing global China, we have to acknowledge, we ask, is Chinese capital qualitatively different? We have to acknowledge the existing processes already underway, such as the processes of capitalist transformation, to quote Luna. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Irna, for your presentation. Really provocative set of case study and set of arguments. And so while those online and those here in the room with us figure out their questions, I would like to ask my own question to get us started. Yes, thank you. I really enjoyed this exposition because I think, you know, perhaps given our various trajectories, we're far more exposed to Chinese geopolitical and economic interests and the projection of Chinese power and sort of like, yeah, and productive projects. Obviously, in the whole China and Africa literature, then sort of like in its presence in Southeast Asia and the various kind of like specific forms that takes. We also know, I think, quite a lot, and it's a very interesting topic, the interactions with the large South American soy producers. We've also heard about, you know, the more geopolitical stories of China and the South China Sea. So it's very telling that we know very little about China and Central Asia. So this is what I think made your presentation so intriguing. But obviously, and I obviously don't want to get you into hot waters, but sort of like the contiguous presence of Xinjiang province a very large cotton producer raises some questions for me. So not so much contained to the cotton seed production sector, but more broadly Xinjiang and largely the Chinese western provinces, and the arguably frontier nature of these provinces, not only frontier, but also complicated through the politics of ethnicity and so on and so forth. I was wondering, how does it play vis-a-vis Tajikistan? You know, is there a competition? What is sort of like in between cotton sectors in Tajikistan, or between Chinese capital in cotton production within China and in the other side of the border in Tajikistan to begin with? And I also was very interested in when you mentioned about these Gu brothers, that they are from Hunan province. You know, what type of Chinese capital is involved? Arguably, it is not capital from Xinjiang province. So how does it play out would be kind of like my question. I think I'll leave it at that and perhaps give the chance to others in the room. So
like first answer, or
as you prefer, shall we take some? Do we have questions?
Not in the chat.
Okay, so please do take this.
Okay, yeah. Well, the question of Xinjiang is very, very important and very interesting. I mean, it's highly dynamic, of course. So there are different aspects. One of the very big Chinese agribusinesses nowadays investing in Tajikistan, like enormous large scale, is from Xinjiang. And what I see throughout the region, actually, and what I noticed, that many companies have moved away from China, right? So what you see actually, that the cotton sector in Tajik, in Central Asia, actually, well, regains interest. That's definitely. So I don't know if there's, well, perhaps you could say there's some competition in that regard, but interesting, there's also interest from Chinese companies who initially, like, not being located in Xinjiang, they were based elsewhere, and they now try to source or have interest to source cotton from Central Asia. Yes. Within the region, if you talk about like awareness of the situation in Xinjiang, I'd say there is, now that it's really depends on who you talk with. I'd say definitely the Tajik state has an interest to basically keep attention really limited. But obviously for the Chinese state, there's an interest in the border region, and in Tajikistan's east, where there's also actually an ethnic minority living, the whole situation in Xinjiang is really worrying. And of course, the Chinese state has an interest to basically in political stability in the region, right? So that's one reason why investments do take place. Yes. The second one, from the Gu brothers, so they come from Henan province, actually, the company which is now still active, that is a very big, or quite a big state-owned farm with a very, very long history in China. It was established in the 1950s. Yes.
We'll take one question from the audience online, and there's also one here. So, do you want to read it? Or she wants to?
No, you can ask.
Okay.
Oh, Martin, yeah.
Hello, dear colleagues. Hi, can you hear me and see me? I see myself on the screen. I hope you can hear me also well. Yeah, is that the case? Can you hear me well? Can you give me some feedback? Can you hear what I'm saying?
We can hear you online, but I don't know if Amod, Helena, can you hear him?
Can you hear me in the seminar room also? That would surely be useful. Happy to talk to you. Yes. So I see you are still making arrangements, and hopefully at one point. Now you can hear me? Yeah. Helena? Yes. You are nodding? Yes.
Yeah,
can you hear me? Yes. Okay, good. Hi, my name is Martin Petrik. I'm from Justus Liebig University in Gießen in Germany. Thanks, Irna, for your, as always, fascinating presentations on what is happening on the ground, especially in Tajikistan. And I appreciate you you share with us many of the insights here in this prestigious forum today. And I'm really puzzled and deeply impressed by you corresponding with Mr. Gu and other key stakeholders, obviously or apparently on very on a personal level. That's great. Exchanging certificates and things like that. That's really nice to see and intriguing in a sense. Yeah, I can only say that I find that highly plausible what you are reporting. I mean, especially the struggles, in implementing or in introducing such kind of advanced seed technologies in a country like Tajikistan. The politicization of the whole strategy, the takeover by the government, also the concerns by the farmers, about what will be their actual benefits, etc. So this is all, I think, valuable in getting an insight into the machine room, of these kind of value chain developments. I'm a bit, at the same time, I'm a bit less convinced by the broader implications or the wider conclusions that you draw also in the end. So you say, okay, these seed entrepreneurs, they consider Tajikistan as a seed frontier in which they want to get some control, gain control over the market. That's probably true, but it's not very surprising, right? I mean, any entering entrepreneur has the same goals, I think, in most markets, be it seed or anything else. And also the fact that this is a process of capitalist transformation on probably both sides of the border, China and Tajikistan. It's also not too surprising if that has been the overall goal of the Tajik transition process since the 1990s. And I mean, we know that in China has developed its very specific brand of capitalism. So we shouldn't really be surprised by that. And I'm also not sure about the evidence, that speaks to these wider geopolitical implications. I mean, do we know anything more specifically about the connections of the seed company with the Chinese government or with any particular other political strategies? I mean, is there really more than just entrepreneurs in a capitalist system doing what entrepreneurs in a capitalist system do, given generally weak institutions and a range of hurdles and obstacles and irritations, that you have been describing for the case of Tajikistan? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Martin. Can you hear me, Martin? Yes. Okay. Yeah. Well, actually, I think that's one of the key issues to point to here, at least from my perspective. So when this company moves in, and particularly because it's a state-owned enterprise, it was really brought as basically this whole idea of cooperation. What it turns out is that it's these entrepreneurs who are basically shaping the whole project according to their interests. Yes, so that is I think one of the key issues that I want to point to here. So that it's not like what the whole idea of all that everything is driven by political imperatives, for instance. That is actually what I aim to address.
Okay, so Martin, if you don't have a retort to that, there's a couple of questions here in the floor. So let me give first the mic to Isba for her question, and then perhaps you can return.
Thank you so much, Helena. Thank you so much, Irna. It was a very wonderful presentation, and I can see quite a lot of overlaps and similarities with how the China is entering into the agricultural sector of Pakistan.
Yeah,
so because it's quite a lot of overlaps and similarities I can address. There are a couple of questions I would like to, I would like to keep myself short and brief. The first thing, that you haven't mentioned anything about the price. Perhaps these Chinese seeds are cheaper as compared to the other varieties that are available in Tajikistan. That's one of the reasons that the farmers are actually switching towards the Chinese seeds. Second thing is that, a common perception about the Chinese products is that they are generally lower in quality. I mean, this is what I have seen. I mean, I'm talking about my experience in Pakistan. So when it comes to the Chinese products, we ultimately, I mean, we understood that this is something of the lower quality. So a little bit of the, I mean, I have sensed it that you have interviewed the farmers, and the farmers have come back with this kind of, that this is a lie and it is not up to the mark, the produce is not up to the mark. But still, I mean, what is the general perception? Is this the price? Is this the quality that the farmers are switching towards it? Another, I mean, the title in which, the title of your presentation, that the subtitle was actually to discuss the ambiguous role of China's. Can you please say a few words about this ambiguity? Because you have mentioned it, but I would like to say precisely a few words about this ambiguity. And the last thing, that one of the things that you have mentioned in your conclusion is that this is the Chinese role is actually non-linear. Why precisely are you saying that this is non-linear? Because I mean, this is the first decade they have entered into the Tajikistan's market. So how is it? I mean, we can forecast that more Chinese companies will definitely enter into the Tajiks or the other countries' economic sectors or agricultural sectors. So what is this non-linearity about? Thank you so much. These are the questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Shall I?
There are questions, yes,
Yeah.
so please do.
Thanks a lot. And my questions were somewhat related to the ones from ISPA, so also related to kind of who uses the seeds, right? So I noticed that you make this distinction quite often about open pollinated versus hybrid seeds, right? So I was also wondering how, for instance, the use of, like, who is my understanding of hybrid seed is that generally it's linked a lot to kind of not just are they more expensive, but also it requires greater input, you know. So so there's this link to kind of who is the farmer, as well as kind of maybe to some extent like how developed are the forces of production in that context, right? So so it's not just about the use of seeds. So is there, for instance, did you see this link, for instance, between say certain groups of farmers, maybe more capitalized farmers relying more on hybrid seed versus the others? And the other one also linked to this open pollinated versus hybrid one is the fact that there is a very strong states, like, so there's already a very well developed and state supported sector, right? I think for instance makes a big difference, and the example which comes to my mind, for instance, is how, for instance, rice and wheat seeds in India are almost all open pollinated, because there is this very strong state supported seed breeding program. Whereas when it comes to horticultural seeds, there's increasingly move to hybrid, right? Where you don't have that kind of state supported sector. So to what extent does kind of this history of cotton specifically in Tajikistan potentially impact also, say, the ability of Chinese seed companies, you know, competing against kind of a fairly well developed state sector for seed? How does that, say, affect the dynamics of the seed companies as well? Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, let me first come back to your question first. The last issue. Yeah, so it's a bit difficult, right? Because the cottonseed sector is in a way it's strongly coordinated. The state, the regime has a very strong interest there, but see, I mean, in terms of agricultural development, and I mean through the whole actually the whole agriculture economy, but cotton as well, it's there is in terms of actual support, in terms of finance or so, that's simply not there. So that's why there is really this deteriorating quality. But yeah, it's the same. It's also with wheat, that you see open pollinated one, while in contrast with the other, actually all the other crop seeds, basically there are a lot of hybrids. And actually farmers often ask, there's actually quite an explicit preference for hybrid seeds if you talk about several other food crops, actually. Going back to your all questions, basically joint questions. First, the issue of price and farmers' priorities, right? Or the way in which they make their decisions. Yes, it's actually, so it's a combination. It's definitely price, and of course, projected yields. But what I already mentioned is that homogeneity is a very important issue as well. And if you look at the places where farmers can buy cotton seed, so it's the ginnery, which is actually the most affordable one. But there you have the risk that the quality or basically the quality is low. If you then look at the better quality cotton seeds, then it's the Chinese, in recent years, the Chinese in Tajikistan, which then offered the relatively best seed. But if it comes, for instance, from Turkey, yeah, the price is at least double. But it depends, of course, also. Something I didn't mention is that in Tajikistan, most farmers sow linted seeds and delinted seeds, and so that they pay per kg, for instance. So nowadays, if you buy seeds from a ginnery, you pay, well, perhaps it's $1 a kilo. But if you get imported delinted seeds, then farmers sow much less. But these seeds are more expensive. So it's, yeah, actually sowing rates for like linted seeds comes a bit difficult perhaps. If farmers sow linted seeds, they sow perhaps 3 times more than when they sow delinted seeds. So that's a big difference. And sometimes then it's on par when you compare prices. Yeah. But if you compare vegetable prices, like vegetable seed prices, Chinese versus Turkish, then sometimes it's 10 times, Chinese seeds are 10 times cheaper, yes. And overall, this whole discourse on quality regarding Chinese goods, that's also very pronounced in Tajikistan. But I notice it less if we talk about seeds. Yeah. And farmers tend to take quite a pragmatic approach as well. Yeah. The ambiguity, yes. So that actually comes back to what I mentioned in the beginning, which I couldn't touch on actually in the talk, is that apart from seeds, there are also other developments in Tajikistan, which you see, for instance, in recent years, people have been starting to import mini cotton ginneries, which allow farmers to become more autonomous from the overall elite controlled sector. So that's something which is very interesting and which requires much more attention, deserves attention on its own. So that's why I'd say it is very ambiguous also in terms of state-society relations. Something what I know, for instance, as well is that when people work for Chinese companies, laborers, they more easily protest than when they start protesting when they work for local companies, local farmers. So you see that if you talk about cultures of resistance or reworking or resisting the situation, that, yeah, it's quite ambiguous, I'd say, in that regard. And the non-linear, yeah, you're definitely, I mean, this is a very good question. It is fairly early, I mean, it's early to say something, right? But what I mentioned here is that there's quite some, well, unexpected, I'd say, trajectories where these, well, projects don't unfold according to plan, right? So that was actually why I used the notion of non-linearity. Yeah, yeah, but definitely it's true. I mean, time will tell. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, so Martin Petrick online did have a retort, but couldn't. Oh. We didn't allow his microphone on, so he's happy to. Please, Martin.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you very much. It seems it works now. Yeah, you can hear me again. Yeah.
Very
okay,
well.
Great.
Thank you.
Yeah, super. Thank you very much. Yeah. So maybe I missed that point. So therefore, allow me this question once more. So. I appreciate all the details of your study on the ground, but I'm not fully convinced yet what geopolitical conclusions we can draw for it, right? So on the broader role of China in the global economy. And maybe you could explain that once more. I mean, the mere fact that this is a state-owned company or that there is state capital involved doesn't necessarily mean that China is following strategic goals with it, right? And you mentioned yourself that most of the participants in these deals, in these activities, seem to come with a very pragmatic stance on them, right? So farmers at least don't consider it as having any geopolitical deeper implications. They're just worried about their seeds, right? And I don't know, when you have direct contact to Mr. Gu or so, or do you have any other hints, yeah, that there is more at play than just making money from seeds and providing benefits to the farmers? or making money or whatever. Yeah, pragmatic goals.
Yes, thank you, Martin. Yeah, well, that was, yeah, I'm not sure if I understand your question correctly, because I have the impression I already answered it more or less. So I think that is the whole idea. Is China really, I mean, China's capital, is it qualitative different, or is it so much different than what is happening already? That is what I do look at in this, did look at in this talk. And that's actually what you're raising now as well, but yeah.
We
Okay,
have
so we agree on the question that we are going to ask.
Yes, yeah.
Okay, good. Well, thanks then, thank you.
And we have a couple of questions more here. So let me give the microphone to British O'Loughlin and then to Chris Kay.
Yeah, do I have to hold this? I think I have a version of the same question.
Okay.
But that's because there are things, no, I can hold it. Or am I not doing it right? I think I don't actually understand how the system works, because actually I don't want to talk yet about the role of China. I need to understand who makes money in this system. So what's capital, big capital, small capital, and what's the problem? Because I really don't understand. I understand why the Gu brothers packed up from your explanation, which is a great story, but I don't know if you've told me everything in that story. They packed up because they invented these new seeds, they brought them to Tajikistan, and then the farmers realized that they could use hybrid seed and still get good yields.
Yeah.
And there's the thing, they could make money, right?
Yeah.
So the Gu brothers just packed up and left because they couldn't do anything about that. Yeah. So that's a story about capital, but it's capital giving up relatively quickly. And there are a number of things when I think about what seed companies do, how do they keep making money?
Yeah.
For example, Monsanto distributed pesticide, no, not pesticide, that's not herbicide.
Yeah.
And therefore affected how you did weeding. Cotton is a crop that needs weeding. Was that irrelevant to how the big farmers make money? You threw us a loop at the end saying that this is about China in the world food industry. But I thought we were talking about cotton as a textile, as a different kind of crop, but you threw us something, which is that actually Tajikistan is even importing cotton seed for oil as a food crop. And that is going to affect what a seed breeder is going to breed for, etc. So I would like you, I think you need to answer at some level Martin's story by giving us a little bit more about how capital is working. It was interesting that you introduced the ginning and these, because I also wondered about that. Actually, when there were all of these reorganizations, how is ginning organized? The idea that the farmer actually has this control over the seed, which you described, depends on their having direct access to the ginning process. Whereas, all of the big companies in my day were really careful about controlling the distribution of seed and making it very difficult for a farmer to plant their own seed. So unless you were like in Uganda and you actually, in the very beginning, had these hand gins that people were working. So I think when you're telling this story, to give it more interest, but also more relation to your conclusions about the role of China in the world, you can't abstract from technology and the organization of ownership and
Yeah.
profit.
Yeah.
And that you went too quickly for me
Okay.
to get through that. And I love hearing about cotton. So, you know.
As anybody who's ever studied Mozambique.
Well, that was a very good question. And I want to also go back a bit to this general question that you put, that is China reordering the global food system, which for me is the most interesting one, because I'm not an expert on Tajikistan, and neither on cotton and so on. But I would like to more the general question. In this way, there's a link to the previous questions about, is there strategy of the Chinese government regarding food systems in the world? I mean, is it mainly to encourage their own capitalists associated with the state to export whatever they can, export seeds, export farm machinery, etc., to encourage, like other Western governments do, to encourage exports of their companies abroad, in this case in Tajikistan? Or is it in some ways to food security, that they want through that the Chinese government has another strategy behind it, by investing in these countries and buying land through private capital and so on? Do they want to secure also certain imports, that they can import food, because for their own national food security, China wants to make sure that they have enough cotton, enough rice, enough soya beans and so on. So what is, in that sense, is it just to get a surplus for the Chinese private capitalists to remit a surplus without, and let thousands of flowers bloom of this private capital that invest wherever you want? We support the Chinese government. For us, the interest is that you get back capital to China, get more influence over those countries or agriculture, whatever it is, without any clear strategy. That's one thing. Because in relation, for example, to Latin America, it's very much of a contrast. There's not much Chinese investment, as far as I know. And the main issue is actually this food security, to get the soya beans and from Argentina and from Brazil for feeding their livestock and so on and so forth. And there's not much direct export of Chinese machinery or Chinese seeds, or trying land grabbing is also marginal compared to other countries. So in that sense, I would like to have some more detail about this general question that you posed so interesting at the beginning. Thank you very much.
And for those joining us online who cannot see us, that was Cristobal Kay, also former editor of the journal. And we have another question here from the floor, from Mark Woutz, and then one online.
I will just keep it very short. It's something that Chris said. You started your seminar by pointing out the share of China in the external debt. I'm not sure why you did that. I mean, it didn't come up in your story, but you know, this growing indebtedness in the share of China is indeed important. But the point is, what is the debt being used for? I mean, you know, kind of, is there, because the story that you tell didn't seem to point much that had to do with that, from as far as I can see. So there are other relations that are at place where an indebtedness toward China is growing. Is the overall indebtedness of the country growing? Which would also depend on your export-import structure. How is that structuring? And so there was some kind of a start to the story that then, in a way, had nothing to do with the story, if you see what I mean. But you wanted to make a point about China, but the point about China is different from the story you tell about the cotton sector. Is that correct?
Well, my point was actually to address China's growing role in the country, and if that has any, if that has an impact on or actually basically facilitates, if that has any relationship with, say, or if it facilitates basically Chinese actors' operations in the rural economy. Yeah, so that is why I use this at the start, but it doesn't return in later parts of the talk.
Let's take the one question we have remaining from the chat. And then we can wrap up with your answer to all of these questions. Sorry.
Hi, Irna. Thanks. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, I can see myself very big on the screen. So thanks for your talk. And I actually, well, I had some of the questions as kind of Bridget, I guess, which was kind of, of course, I guess what you're saying is that, as I'm understanding your responses, that maybe the whole thing about global China is maybe in some senses exaggerated, and in fact, it does, it's just feeding into whatever is going on in the countryside already as just another kind of actor. I don't know if that paraphrasing kind of sums up what you're getting at. So I think that was sort of one of my questions as well. But actually, I was interested in something else that you had pointed out in the presentation, that you had a quote which said that actually there's a move from the open pollination to the hybrid seeds, but they don't actually work that well. And I just wondered, like, if you could tell us a bit more about it. Is it unsuitable to the ecology, and how does that link to, the question of resistance that is that you said you could say more about in the Q&A maybe. So is that what is that what people are resisting? Because it seems that it doesn't work for them, but they still adopt these technologies. And so, yeah, if you could kind of just explain that sort of contradiction a bit. So that's all. Thanks so much.
Okay. Yes. Yeah. Let me first go back to the question online. So hybrid cotton seeds are, well, they have never really spread until recently, and farmers are not really familiar with them. And so there's also some, what I notice is that it's often unclear what kind of seed it is. So farmers then, they plant it and they try to resow it next season. So that is one issue, that there's simply not much familiarity with hybrid cottonseed. And yeah, I think though there is not really any like an ecological environmental issue which would actually affect it. Apart from what I mentioned already, is that many farmers can't. They don't have the technology needed for sowing the delinted seed, which is an issue often when seeds are imported, then it is the delinted seed, which is difficult for farmers. So that is a barrier. I don't know if that answers your questions a bit. Yeah. Going back to Chris Kay's question, now I have to. That was I have to go back to some notes, but perhaps you can help me a bit again.
Well, in some ways, the question is a bit: is there strategy of
the
Chinese? Is it let private capital do whatever the Chinese capital, with assistance of the state and some management of the state, direction of the state, is just do whatever you want, expand to the world market in imports, in exporting machinery, in imports, and so on and so forth, or is there clear strategy that it's in this sense, I meant mainly for food imports, which for the government is very important. If you don't provide food for your population, the prices rise, you've got a riot, the full government folds.
Yes.
So,
well, overall, of course, economic growth is key for the Chinese state. So that's definitely an issue, and I know that private enterprises have been a concern for the Chinese state before, because those were less easily to be controlled, right? Also in terms of the reputation they had overseas. So I wouldn't say there is no strategy if they want to actually expand overseas, either for economic growth or indeed for food supplies. But I think the issue of food imports has in my view, really has been exaggerated in previous years, particularly around this global land grab development, when it was really thought that Chinese companies went overseas to produce food crops that were actually re-exported actually to China, because later on it was, well, observed that it often didn't happen, and that's also has not been the case in Tajikistan. The food crops that had been produced there have been sold on local markets. And as for the cotton in Tajikistan, that has been actually exported to other countries, including China. But I find it at this stage also very difficult to say if we talk about Central Asia, if there are these strategies. I know, for instance, that the Chinese Academy of Agricultural Sciences actually is developing specific cotton seed varieties, which actually may actually benefit the Chinese cotton sector or textile sector in the end. Yeah, I don't know if that. And thank you very much for your question. But I think there's a lot to discuss more on the whole on the notion of capital and all the differences that are there. So I'm feel encouraged to delve into that more. Oh.
No, I don't think.
Yeah. Good. Well, unless there's any pressing questions now, it is then my turn to thank you all for joining us today. Just a reminder that the program for the next term will be announced in January, and we absolutely look forward to having you all with us, joining us in the coming seminars. And just a reminder that you are very welcome to sign up to our mailing list, visit our website, Agrarian Questions, and obviously watch this and other seminars in our very well attended YouTube channel. So thank you very much, and we'll see you in January. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you, Irma.